Pitt's new WPIAL stars vow to bring the team newfound success. Let's talk about the new WPIAL transfer pipeline for Pitt football. And I also want to talk a little bit about the start of the 2024 recruiting class and where it's going from here. It's all come up today on this episode of Locked On Pitt.
You are Locked On Pitt, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Panthers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the episode of the Locked On Pitt podcast, everybody. As always, I'm your host, Nick Fairbaugh. Today's episode of Locked On Pitt is brought to you by FanDuel. This episode, folks, FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. All right, folks. I want to talk a little bit about this newfound kind of WPIAL, I guess you would call it a pipeline. I don't really know what else to call it other than a pipeline, because really, when you look at it, that's what it was. This was a pipeline to me. And so you take a look. Phil Jurkovec, Dejon Reynolds is getting recruited by Donovan McMillion to come here. And, you know, Derrick Davis is coming back. And you got essentially 4 transfers because of the WPIAL pipeline. I'm counting Reynolds in there because McMillion really kind of aided in that. But the 3 WPIAL guys coming back, we've seen this before with MJ Devonshire and Johnny Patrician and so many others as well, that this is a real thing. This is becoming a commonplace thing for WPIAL guys that have left Pittsburgh, gone elsewhere, and then want to return. A lot of them have come back and really have embraced the idea of Pitt as a program. And, you know, I was down there Wednesday talking to McMillion and Jurkovec and Davis. Got to know all of them. I'll talk about them specifically a little bit later. Not in this episode, but likely next week. We'll air those interviews, and I got to talk to them one-on-one a little bit about some pretty intricate stuff that really, it showed me a lot about them as players. But you look at this group of WPIAL players now on this team. It starts with those 3 first, but then you have Devonshire, you have Dayon Hayes, you have Nakai Johnson, you have Elliott Donald, you have Dorian Ford. You have so many guys, Sean Fitzsimmons. There are just so many guys in terms of WPIAL players on this football team at this point, and that's not even counting the big men up front, where you have, you know, Devin Danielson and Jake Cradle and Blake Zubovich and all these guys. It's a heavy WPIAL group right now. There's a lot of WPIAL kids on this team, and the transfer portal has been the instrument to bring a lot of these high-ranked kids back, right? Pitt was never getting Derrick Davis out of high school or Donovan McMillion or Jurkovec, but they're all coming back. And it's not just like Pitt's giving them a lifeline and it's flopping. Like, these guys are coming back home and being extremely good players for teams that compete in the HBCU. Devonshire has been a huge addition for Pitt. Patrician was a huge addition for Pitt. Cradle has been a multi-year starter in terms of landing him right out of high school too. So they've kind of done both avenues where, sure, they'll win some in the WPIAL. You know, they'll land some of, like, they'll land Paris Ford and DeVar Hamlin and Jake Cradle and Blake Zubovich, some of those high-ranked guys. And when that happens, a lot of good things can work. But it's not always going to be that way either. And that, in particular, has left fans frustrated with the WPIAL, and I understand that. But that transfer market has proven to be fruitful for them. You just look at what I named and some of those guys that have come in and how important they were to those teams. And you can't overlook those. You can't overlook those impact transfers. And so it's easy to say, let them go elsewhere. Give them the cold shoulder. But there's really no reason to do it. You know, a lot of these guys aren't doing this out of malice. They're doing it because, you know, I thought Derrick Davis's and And Donovan McMillion's answers were very interesting, that they just wanted to get away. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes guys, man, just don't want to be in Pittsburgh. They just want to leave. And that's fine. If you just want to leave, fine. And clearly that's kind of what happened. And they've done a lot of maturing. And now that they have done that maturing, now they're going back home because they feel like they can. They've grown enough in that chapter of their life, and they're a little bit older and a little bit more mature, and they're ready to come back home. And that happens. That absolutely happens. And so Pitt should embrace this new style of WPIAL kids coming back. It's fine because it works. Now, you risk being a lifeline option for them out of high school. Absolutely. You do risk kind of kids saying, oh, we can go elsewhere and then return home. But hey, if they're good enough, are you really going to be that upset about that? Is anyone that upset still at MJ Devonshire for going to Kentucky? Is anybody upset at Johnny Patrician, who was at Penn State? No. Absolutely no one is. Those were quality transfers. And so this is kind of a new norm in WPIAL recruiting for Pitt. They didn't land Dante Cephas, and that's fine. They're not going to land everybody that tries to return home from the WPIAL. But they beat out some pretty good teams for both McMillion and Davis. Davis mentioning South Carolina and North Carolina State specifically. Those are two good teams that he could have gone to. And McMillian had other Power 5 options that he could have gone to, but Pitt won. And Jurkovec is a good fit, too, in terms of the quarterback of the system. And so this WPIAL type of recruiting now, it's a different sphere. It's a different vibe. But Pitt should be players in the WPIAL transfer portal. And that's where they make their hay. It's fine because these guys continue to prove that they're good players. It works for Pitt. And that's not an issue. If it works, don't fight. Just let it happen. It's a little bit of an awkward type of trend, but it's also a trend that's giving Pitt a real fruitful impact in the WPIAL area. They're able to build pipelines through high school recruiting, and it wouldn't be all that surprising if this even ends up potentially strengthening the high school recruiting in the local area. And you can look at some other things where they have some pipelines that they maybe wanted to restore and all of that. And we'll talk about that and how this kind of fits into the grand scheme of things with the 2024 recruiting class, because there's definitely been enough action there for Pitt in terms of who they've gotten, who they haven't gotten, and kind of how they're changing their PA recruiting overall. But first, folks, before I want to get into that, I want to let you know about FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On, folks. And the NFL playoffs are here. We are really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the number one sportsbook in America. That's FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting so much more fun and easy. New customers, all you have to do is join today, and you get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed. When you take your bets, folks, you only have to put down $5 and you can get as much as $150 back. All you have to do is sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's signing up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has all your favorite bets from the money line to point spreads to player props and so much more. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a decent chance at a bigger payout in the same game parlay. Pitt is +1 right now against Miami. If you want to throw some down and see if the Panthers are going to win that one and you believe that, make sure to throw that down, because all you have to do, folks, place a bet down. You get FanDuel.com/lockedon. You can get up to $150 with just a $5 bet. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the NFL and of Locked On. All right, folks, welcome back to the Locked On Pitt podcast. As we're discussing kind of this newfound WPIAL transfer market for Pitt and how it's filling out depth this year. Got them their starting quarterback, got them a really good safety to compete with PJ O'Brien and Javon McIntyre up there. And it also got them a really good depth running back that was highly rated. It got them good athletes. These guys were highly rated for a reason, and you can see why in a lot of ways, why they were highly rated. And so for me, I look at Pitt in that type of pipeline and some of the guys that have come through said pipeline, and I look at it in a very positive manner. Other people won't because they'll want Narduzzi and his staff to give some of these guys a cold shoulder after they kind of bicker their way around high school. But I'll say this: the high school recruiting process is so vastly different, and guys change over time, and we know that. And that really is kind of the lesson to take from here as well. So these guys are have an opportunity to have a big impact on this Pitt team, not just this year, but in the future. In Jurkovec's case, certainly as well this year. Despite him not coming here initially out of high school, obviously was not going to come here the second time around with Kenny Pickett here as the starter. So that really wasn't it. But let's talk about that WPIAL kind of mood in the 2024 recruiting class because Pitt lost Anthony Specca to Penn State about a week ago. I didn't really want to talk about it just because some of it was very reactionary at the time. And why can't Pitt land the WPIAL kids? Oh, they didn't land Rodney Gallagher, and they didn't land Tamir Robinson, and they didn't land any of these kids, right? But why can't Pitt land the top 4 stars? Listen, I think there's a few things in regards to all this. First of all, one, West Virginia is closer to Rodney Gallagher in that case. That's his hometown team, essentially. Despite some of those Pitt connections, he is legitimately closer to West Virginia than he is Pitt. And that's sometimes just how the way the cookie crumbles. And sometimes these kids don't want to be in Pittsburgh anymore. And I said that already with Derrick Davis and Donovan McMillion. Sometimes they just don't want to be here right now. And that's fine. They want to go off for 1 or 2 years and then maybe return home. And that's kind of what they want to do. That's what they do. When you are in college, you don't know what you were going to do when you were 18 years old. It changes in flux. All the time, some of them want to play for Pitt, and that's their ride or die, like a Dayon Hayes or a Paris Ford or a DeMar Hamlin, right? Those guys exist too. MJ Devonshire is no less of a Pitt man just because he went to Kentucky first. He's going to go down in legendary terms, right? His pick six against West Virginia is going to be remembered for a very long time. So, absolutely. There is a lot that I look at with Pitt and say this is working for them. Specca could be the type of guy that circles back in 2 years and wants to come back home to Pitt. This is a very reasonable outcome. It's fine. Pitt's not going to get everybody in the WPIAL. They recruit Florida and Georgia and Ohio and New Jersey and all these other areas very well. And they're starting to develop a pipeline out in central Pennsylvania too. And and they've tapped a little bit into the eastern part. Jasir Whittington is obviously out of Philly, and that's kind of a guy that is an outlier. A 4-star out of Philadelphia is not a guy that usually comes to Pitt, even though Pitt has gotten so many guys from that kind of area in terms of up to the northeast and sometimes Harrisburgish in the past, especially under Dave Wannstedt. They have landed those guys at times. They really have not cracked into Philadelphia. And even recently, I mean, Javon McIntyre, they did land. But I think the more interesting pipeline is actually this central PA type of pipeline. Gavin Bartholomew is there. But they've also got Kenny Johnson coming from there this year. And they just got a commitment from Juelz Goff, a running back from York, which is very interesting. And you're starting to see kind of that Lancaster, York area become an interesting fit for Pitt because that is Penn State country. There's no doubt about that. Pennsylvania is Penn State country as a whole, quite honestly. And so it's hard whenever you're going up against Penn State in state. But Pitt got a win in the Kenny Johnson recruitment. They have one in the Jasir Whittington recruitment. And Goff, although not offered by Penn State, it's a good scouting find by Pitt to get in there because his tape's very impressive. And so if Pitt's not going to land everybody in the WPIAL, well, you can make it up in Central PA, you can make it up in Erie, you can make it up there, and you can certainly make it up in Florida and wherever else you are. It's not necessary to land all the WPIAL kids out of high school. But you do, I think, one thing that I would like to see improve in terms of this is sometimes it does feel like Pitt can be late to recognize what's in their own backyard. I think that is one thing that can be a little frustrating. And sometimes it's not always the high rank guys. Usually they're in pretty early on the high rank guys, and they're going to be in on Quentin Martin and all these guys in the 24 class very hard, even with Specca out of the picture. I anticipate they'd still push him, right? Never out of it. You really never quit that type of recruitment. But you also look at the pipeline that they're developing in that York Lancaster area, and it could be very, very intriguing to get some of those guys to Pitt. And if you can crack into Philadelphia even more, that is very much as important as any pipeline. Pitt's been trying to crack into there and in Detroit more and more. And every now and then they get a guy or two from those areas, but they haven't cracked the code just quite yet to make those pipelines. I think those are two areas they can really focus on. Right, they kind of cracked the whole state of Florida. They're really good in Central. They're really good in Miami. They get guys out of Tampa. They don't really recruit the Panhandle that much, but they get everybody essentially in that area. They've recruited Jacksonville, Tampa Bay. They've recruited down to Miami. They recruit in Orlando. They recruit all these areas. It's not really an issue for them. They recruit the Atlanta area. They recruit everywhere in Georgia. They recruit the 757. They recruit Ohio extremely well from Cincinnati all the way back to Cleveland. They recruit all those areas. They recruit New Jersey. They recruit New York when it's there. They recruit Massachusetts and Connecticut. Pitt has a very diverse kind of map, and then they've started to get into California, and they still poke around in Texas a little bit. So Pitt has kind of this wide map of recruiting, but in state you still can't overlook it. And the WPIAL recruiting in particular has taken a new form. And it's not always going to be fruitful for Pitt out of high school. It never has been. But with the portal, it can be fruitful in a much different way, in a much different light, which I think is fascinating for Pitt and good for them. In the past, MJ Devonshire doesn't happen. It doesn't. That's a new portal type of thing. Derrick Davis and Donovan McMillion don't come here probably. And they have the opportunity not just to come here, but make an immediate impact while coming here. That is the age of the transfer portal working well for Pitt. And so every guy that goes elsewhere, that's a 4 or 5 star that maybe doesn't crack the code, can easily come right back to Pitt. And if Pitt's the rebound, you don't feel great about being a rebound. But if they work out like all these other guys have that have come through the program and continue to give Pitt results and really, quite honestly, some of these guys become legitimately heralded. You take it every day of the week, period. And so this new form of WPIAL recruiting for Pitt is fairly interesting. And it makes the high school WPIAL recruiting a little bit less important. It's not that Pitt should not try to land these guys out of high school. It's that there's just other ways to which they can do it. There are other means of which they can land these guys. And it's fairly fascinating to me about how they can easily do it. But this team continues to recruit very interestingly in the WPIAL. And listen, I think you look at a Derrick Davis, that's the quality type of depth he brings right there in the second, the running back room, and then McMillion in the secondary. Man, you take those any day of the week. You needed those. Jurkovec obviously is going to be the starter, And even that rocky road, I know he got ripped up for his quote that every WPIAL kid should come to Pitt out of high school. Listen, he's got he's got a perspective that very few have. He's transferred twice. The second time, he didn't really have an option to come to Pitt because of Kenny Pickett, and he's much wiser. And that's what he believes. That's what he believes. He has that perspective of going elsewhere and it not really working out for him. Didn't work out at Notre Dame. Was really good at first at Boston College. Then he got hurt, and now he's back here at Pitt. And so he's got unique perspective in that area. And these guys that come back clearly come back because they have some type of pride in playing for Pitt. And I think that continuously shows through in their games. And that's very true for MJ Devonshire and all these guys. Certainly Johnny Patrician, who if you told no one that he went to Penn State, you wouldn't know. And so Pitt just continuously has reshaped their WPIAL recruiting, and now doing it through the portal, it's given them so much fruit from it. You know that they just have to keep going for it at this point because it really has been fairly impressive to me in terms of the fruits of this WPIAL kind of pipeline they have developed. All right, everybody. As always, thanks for listening to the Locked On Pitt podcast. It's all for this episode. When we come back next time, talk a little Pitt Miami action. We'll see what happens in this game. Obviously, a huge game for the Panthers. And folks, as we end it here, as always, hail to Pitt.